All right. Well, hmm. Hmm. All right. Well, it is a propitious time. It is a propitious time because in the evolution of human consciousness and in the ongoing strength and energy of analogic consciousness, in spite of the pressures and demands put upon it by the flowing onward of industrial civilization and all its demands, there still is a sense of the value of the language arts. And that value I know exists because it is here in this moment, being shared with you. The awareness of the value of the language arts and all the dimensions that they live, move, and have their being and their meaning in, which is us, which is our consciousness, in the democratic, free flowing form of consciousness exchange that we call literary conversation. Um, and oh, doesn't it have a long, enduring, um, formational model for us as we look at it, going on and on in time, all through time, before the book, before the page, mm, the oral traditions and all the symbolic lore that was exchanged, the natural world and the way that it was perceived. The natural world in the way that it was perceived, in the turning of the leaves of the foliage in the wind, as well as in the imprints of the language left by other life forms, the footprints in the creek bank of the raccoon, the steps of the ibis upon the muddy banks of the Nile. Many forms of tracks, right? Nature is a text. So out of that comes this formation, of what comes down to us now is what our understanding is of the language arts. And it is good that we have forms to consider now. So the subject, of our conversation this evening revolves around this, perhaps to many mysterious, if not unknown, historical literary character by the name of Friedrich Schiller. And most specifically, I would like to draw some of my thoughts from the content of his book on aesthetics. And it was a series of letters written with the subject being aesthetics. Um, the how are we to understand the nature of beauty in itself as well as in its manifestations? Um, it was written in response to the needs of his own consciousness, in response to the story of his ongoing life, in response to the demands of his time, which is something that might be familiar to us because that's an idea that is not unusual, the demands of his time. The demands of his time and the demands of his times, the zeitgeist, the spirit of his age. It was written out of a particular context and need in a time of fomenting revolution, of foment and revolution, and of cataclysmic upheavals involving changes in social institutions, in some ways driven and motivated in response to a living and charged idea emerging from human consciousness, this notion of liberty, of freedom, of justice, and of equality, and of, as they called it, brotherhood, meaning a sense of the kinship in what is universal in human beings, expressed in the way that it is expressed with all its universal energies and also all that limits it, which only becomes apparent later on in time to certain individuals, and even that is often disagreed upon. But it was the time of the French Revolution, which was happening over in France. The territory, the country, the administrative state adjacent to where Schiller was living, which at that time was in some of these so for my purposes, they are nation states, but they are more like in the nature of principalities. The way that Germany was put together politically and administratively at that time, principalities ruled by dukes and kings and princesses and princes of various relationships to titles such as those, and at the same time, there was awareness, as always. These are human beings, and so there are a great many windows into understanding the way that they thought, which is so very similar to you and I, very similar to you and I, and yet so very different to you and I, and in their difference, even more familiar to us. As these ideas change form in our ever-changing minds, as we examine them and think about them. But over in France, which had, progressed, in its form of government in a kind of to a different trajectory than had the principalities and dukedoms of Germany, there was this metropolitan and transitional into industry, state, which was undergoing this upheaval, involving the French Revolution. And so this caused people to think. This caused people to think about this a lot because they saw this happen. They identified with it like we do. We see these things. We seem to be captivated by the drama of them and by the spectacle and the contemplation of such a thing as the mode of government and the forms of administration changing in such a way that seems to be a reaction or something in response to some tumultuous upwelling of popular feeling. And this causes us to be reminded of Homeric kind of themes, and at the same time, it's we become aware of something very disillusioning. As soon as our idealisms are energized, when we see something that's moving according to this form of human hope, we see the consequences of it erupting, along these crackling and chaotic lines, and then we see the reactions, and we hear finally the rubble as it bounces of what has been toppled, and this is like in reference to during the process of the entire French Revolution, there was what came to be called later on in popular history as the Reign of Terror, which meant bad times, bad news, rivalry, and violence, and this too disturbed the mind of one such as Schiller and caused him to ask himself certain questions. Why would an individual be so concerned about something that was happening in a place that was adjacent to him? Well, obviously, there's the noise is felt in one place sneezes, and another place catches cold, and administratively in the influx of populations in transition for all kinds of dire reasons, and the influences and counter-influences of popular feeling and popular opinion, which the more they are inflamed, the quicker they seem to move, like a fire, you might say, very much like that. So it's a lesson before it is called living in interesting times. Schiller did this, and the works are creative, and this is and are of beneficialness, of beneficence and of benefit to us in these changing times. I guess perhaps the times are always interesting, and of course the times are always contemporaneous with each other in omniscient ways. But also, one being human sees power imbalances and the corruptions of power imbalances all the time. Schiller, from the time he was a child, he was actually, I don't want to say he was taken from his home, but I do want to say against his parents' wishes, and this was probably later on in his adolescence. Against his parents' wishes, he became something of a ward of the Duke there, who took Schiller under his wing, so to speak. His father was a military surgeon, And so that gave them a certain kind of visibility to one such as the Duke. And as a student, he showed promise in such a way that this Duke wanted him under his wing and to attend the finest school where this particular Duke was cultivating his administrative and political elite, you might say. And so, against his parents' wishes, and I don't know the details of that, but it is said that against his parents' wishes, he was schooled in this place. I don't know if it was such that, I do not know how that, plays out in the story of Schiller's life, seen, as a human drama. I do not know. But suffice it to say that at that place, though strict and in all the ways that German pedagogy is, he also became aware of the inspiring currents of philosophical thought, the empiricist and the Enlightenment, as they called it. And these people in these various political offices and influences were so influenced by the values of the Enlightenment, and hopefully they really understood them and were able to bring them into some kind of active presence in the administrative structures over which they had influence. Also, along with that, though, there was a time when an author such as Goethe could come under the what's the word? The protection, the domain, the patronage of another duke in a nearby principality in Germany, and become acquainted with so many forms of worldly interaction, and yet at the same time be recognized and understood, and it was valued that these were also, many of them, they brought forth from their consciousness fruits that were not tangible in form. They brought forth literature, and this was known and cherished and honored and cultivated in all kinds of ways that might seem, alien to us now, but and perhaps they are. But what's similar is that they involve being aware of human beings and human realities and the different people in different places and a different history of the nature of the human being. Some call Schiller's aesthetic letters the work of philosophical anthropology, which is, to me at least at this moment, it's kind of I like that kind of general concept. But undoubtedly, it was at that time when one could study, well, what is the nature of the human being that that undergoes or experiences this? And what is the nature of experience itself? And what can we really truly come to know and understand in our experience and understanding? And this becomes the domain of the great Immanuel Kant, the philosopher, whose expressions were such a pivotal contribution. And here is what Kant contributed that allowed this to be formed and inspiring as thought to all these other creative thinkers. And that is this. You could say this. Before Kant, philosophers and people to whom it mattered would ask themselves, what is good and what is not good? What is truth and what is falsehood? What is being and what is not being? But with Kant, we began to understand that, there's another way to think of it. And that is, there is this other energy which is independent in its being and in the way it moves, independent of all mechanical law. Everything that is available to our senses becomes clear to us through the workings out of mechanical law. But there is this other energy which is spontaneously on its own, working independently. Oh, this is consciousness. This is consciousness. And but it is the workings of this consciousness, which is not a thing. If it was a thing, it would be subject to mechanical law, which we understand and can trace. But this is a thing that our ways of understanding can't say that about. And yet it is the source of all our understanding of the workings of the mechanical law and the mechanical laws. And this is consciousness. And out of this consciousness, only with this consciousness is it possible to create laws, laws that can govern, that can governments and laws and ethics and codes of morality that will work for all these different people in all these different situations. This notion of law comes from consciousness. It allows us to give ourselves laws. Oh, but there's also this consciousness out of which it is impossible to even conceive of. Without consciousness, we make, out of consciousness, we make aesthetic judgments. We make aesthetic judgments. We see beauty. We make aesthetic judgments. We give ourselves law. And then, of course, out of consciousness, we share our ideas of divinity. We share, we make, we give. All of this is from consciousness, not from the things in themselves, whatever they are. But all we know of them is their movement according to mechanical laws. Oh, and this, for Schiller, this was for so many, for all of us always, really. This is a certain initiatory threshold or doorway that we can go through to see, oh, yes, it could be. We are free to accept this gift as a different way of thinking, or a way to come clear, to make clear to ourselves what our thoughts really are. And as for Schiller, and so for us, And so let me skip ahead in a certain sense to, let me actually address a little bit more of the demands made on Schiller, what was Schiller's disillusionment? And I don't know if he put it in these terms. If he did, he spoke of it in all the dualities. He would speak, perhaps. We could interpret his disillusionment as well as his idealism. We could speak of his the challenges to his idealistic conceptions. Mainly, we can speak of the polarities of his thought and the equanimous rhetorical structures and mental structures along which his thought did move. And I say his thought did move because he was doing, you could say, much more than Kant. When I say that, I don't mean to put them on some differing level of quality or anything like that. But it's more like Schiller, for example, would say, what is beauty? Now, to Kant, beauty is a judgment of consciousness, and as such is a subjective judgment without external any kind of formula of mathematical law or criteria of judgment to call it anything but subjective. Schiller he searched, and this is also the way his thought moved. He moves, because it still continues to move in us. It's doing that now. It is the fate of certain works of art to always live on in us, and this is how it is manifested. Yes, and so for Schiller, we could say his is a duality. His is the characteristic duality of the idealist, you might say. It is the duality of instinct and the duality of reason. Instinct and reason, you could also call it sense experience and idea. You could also call it, custom and law. You could also call it, you could call it many things, and it appears in many ways, but it still is moving according to this characteristic pattern. Because for Schiller, his notion, beauty, is not objective in the way that Kant might want it to be objective, but beauty is a presence that we come to know through its manifestations, you see. And through its manifestations, if we awaken to it in a certain way, we can come closer to the source from which those manifestations came. The manifestations occur in the realm of nature and time and space and instinct, but the source, to be aware of the source, brings us closer to the nature of the idea, or the meaning, the symbolic meaning behind it. For an idealistic dualist, such as we all are in a certain sense, we demand from the artwork inwardly we demand, whether we consciously know it or not, we demand from the artwork a symbol in which we can see somehow a suggestion of the transition of that which makes the plant or the flower alive, of that transition of understanding into like this, the sources of it in ways and forms that we cannot conceive of, not yet at least, we cannot, or that we cannot see with our eyes, ever in any sense, and yet in a certain sense we can through the medium of consciousness. You see, this is how the friendship between Goethe and Schiller is ever fruitful and ever exemplary in the ways that we can come to understand the ideas of both. And the ways we can understand, in coming to understand those ideas, they're creative always in the way that they work. And so in coming to understand those ideas, it can bring us to an awareness of creativity, in which we personally, intimately may be involved in, through our sincerity, through our interest in them, and through our willingness to follow through. Goethe, in contrast to Schiller, the dualist, whose themes, you might say, are instinct and reason, Goethe's theme is spirit and nature. No, unity and nature. Instinct and reason, unity in nature. But it's more than that. Goethe's theme is unity, and Schiller's is duality. Goethe's, one of his containers, you could say, to look at is nature. Yes, to see spirit in abstraction, and then to have some spontaneous insight unknown to any mechanistic law of nature, to be able to see spirit in abstraction and then be able to witness or create a manifestation of that in nature. Whoa, is like a cosmic kind of work and unity in nature. Whereas for Schiller, it's going to have to be in a different sense, or we will think of it in a different sense now that we started to talk about it this way. For Schiller, it's going to be like instinct and reason, or sense impression and consciousness as worked out, where duality always is worked out, in character, i.e. human character, living in a world of space and time, where all the perceptions are to be mediated, through the world of time and space, with all the challenges related to that. You see, so Schiller looks at the aftermath of the French Revolution and the violence and all of the bad things that happened. And Schiller comes to understand that there's a way that we can think of the nature of the state, which will give us insight into the workings of human character, And so, with that, let us have a sample of his thought and his writing, and we. It's really actually a gift, that the way that we read this, we're so, I don't know, maybe I'm generalizing. We're so unused to thinking of it as being interesting, because a certain element of our essential human gift, reading comprehension, along lines of forms of literature such as this, is rarely exercised in this world. This is an analogic expression, in an ever more digitalized world, And yet, between the pages of the book, it is still there for us. We can still freely have access to it, so there's something to be said about that. Anyway, but here's a statement then about, here we will find a little bit more about the way Schiller thinks about character and about inevitability and necessity as a manifestation of the demands of nature, and hopefully in the next few minutes, we'll see that in relation to the way the state is. Let's find out. This is a little bit of from the third letter of Schiller's Letters on Aesthetics. He writes, "Nature treats man." Oh, okay, and I must say we will have we will see, some of our some of the partialities in our very language, and yes, we will see them, and they will be there, and so we will see this. Nature treats man, meaning human beings, but this is the words. Nature treats man no better than the rest of nature works. Nature treats the human no better than the rest of nature works. Nature is what nature is. Nature is what nature does. Nature is necessity. And humans, well, they're of a different being. Nature does what nature does, and we are limited by it in this way. And it doesn't treat us better than anything in nature is treated. Things form and change, to red in tooth and claw. And life must feed on life, and all of this. Nature treats human beings no different than nature treats itself, you see. That's me. That's my gloss. What I'm doing also, I think in my, way of working, with the art of reading is to compose marginal glosses. That's what I'll be doing here a lot, and I hope it's illuminating. I see it in my mind, in my imagination, as being a column of print on the page, and then the gloss on the side, the marginalia. And the marginalia of many writers is very inspiring and insightful and inciting to read, because all the time, when our attention is engaged in reading or in anything else, but specifically in reading or listening, there is the energy of our response to it, and at first, it's like much more reactive and all of this, but as we settle into it and get the feel of it, then it begins to awaken other energies in us as we fall into, entrainment or synchronicity or simply groove, with the flow of the thought, and we can forgive a lot, but we can also become aware of energies of our own kind of percolating in there. Everybody is punctuating their own sentence of the lines of words that life is writing in their soul. And we are given models of this all the time, and that is one of the ways that literature is of great benefit to human beings. And here we are working on it, right now. Anyway, so nature acts upon humans wherever they are, even as even before they are free to act as a spontaneous agent, even before they are free to act as a spontaneous agent. Human character free to act as a spontaneous agent. That's consciousness coming out of itself and entering into the world. But it is admitted that this is a product of culture. This is a product of understanding, of maturity, of self-education, of a path upon which we go. And if we're not there, we're not there. It would be a case of the blind leading the blind. If human character without the means to and without the exercise, to become more skilled in the arts of awareness of the way that it moves and is. Without that, there is no agency. This is what makes a human, but nature doesn't care about that. Nature does what nature does. And we are living in nature. We have to we have to work within nature and the demands that it imposes on us. Nature is something out there, but also our nature as unformed beings. You see, this is why revolutions fail. I mean, maybe I'll try not to draw out that obvious conclusion so much. We'll talk about that a little bit, but let's just really step back from the spectacle, as expressed, in the human political story, and begin to see the source out of which these energies that we see in one way, in one spectacular and overwhelming way, we can see where those energies actually come from in a more original way in us, and maybe get a little bit of perspective on our own conditioning. And we can do it through sincere self-education in aesthetics. And this is a point of what Schiller is making. This is one of his main messages. Aesthetic education is intimately connected with moral education and with moral perception. As a matter of fact, when a human is still in a state of ignorance, we are born ignorant and educated to become more so without understanding what true education really is, and so we grope in the dark, but always we hearken, groping in the dark, to something that moves us in a certain way. There's something about something beautiful that makes itself known to us, even when we cannot articulate what that is in our minds. We might just be attracted to it, but we know nothing about it. We might, look, when we look at a fire and we're like, primordial, look at the fire. Look at the glowing of the coal. We don't know that's a glowing coal. We might not even know that fire is hot. We know it's entrancing and dancing and beautiful. And the glowing coal is like, it looks so, I want to be near it. I want it. I want to be it. I taste it, and burn our tongues on a hot coal, And this is like, this is in this way, in this most crude way, beauty announces itself to us. And yes, beauty brings a lesson that may be harsh, because this beauty is very much connected with nature, and nature is what surrounds us, whether we are ignorant or not. Nature we must always deal with. So let's go back to Schiller for a moment. Okay. So what I've just described in so many words, this growth of freedom and spontaneity and self-understanding is what makes the person a person, makes the human being. But it has the ability to reenact, by reasons of these steps it has taken on its behalf, it reenacts by means of reason, those steps it has taken on his behalf. It reenacts by means of reason. The awareness of beauty reenacts itself by means of reason, you see. By means of reason. It reenacts itself. We want to come close to our experience of beauty. We want to do it in ways where it doesn't hurt us. And so it reenacts itself in our minds with the help of reason, which is ever growing as our ability to reason grows in our consciousness, you see. And therefore transforms a work born of need. Here we're quoting Schiller again. Transforming a work born of need into one of our own free choice, elevating physical necessity to moral necessity. And you'll notice that there's already resistance here, which is like the next step. It brings a work of need, perhaps to satisfy a need, into a work, a less seemingly obvious need, a work of consciousness. We're getting close to what we call art. And one of the characteristics of art is it's in a different domain than the realm of necessity. That's why sometimes, it's so easy to have a problem with it. It's the complex, that we are there to work out. It's a complex that becomes simple. That's what complexes do. Hopefully. They turn into simplicities. They turn into profundities, you see. Complexity resolved is profundity. You could say that. That's, sometimes that's true, right? Anyway, but how does that relate to the state? This is an interesting insight. Let me just bring in the state a little bit, if I can find it. As I read in public, my mind begins to notice different things on the page that kind of distract me. Okay, here I was just about to give up and wing it, but now I don't have to. So this is more from Schiller. He's going to help us here. He's going to help us. The great problem is, the great problem is that physical society cannot cease to exist for a moment in time, while moral society is forming an idea. The great problem is that physical society, this is a form and structure built out of human reasoning, out of human spirit, but it's built according to the demands, of nature. It helps serve our survival needs, right? The physical state does this, and it cannot. We can't say stop. Stop the workings of society. Stop time from flowing. Stop people from doing things, so that we can figure it out maybe and reform it. It's not that way. It must always go on, intrinsically connected to the process of our survival, which must always go on. And so the great problem then is that physical society cannot cease to exist for a moment in time, while moral society is forming as an idea. See, in time, as an idea. See, this is the duality as expressed by Schiller, which is the set of components, polarities, right, by which we understand this mystery called human character, in which we come to the understanding of further mysteries. This is the way of Schiller, as so many others. And you see, moral society is forming as an idea. Physical society is existing in time. Physical society cannot stop. Moral society, morality, is existing and reenacting itself according to the terms of beauty and goodness and truth, reenacting itself uniquely in each individual mind, And we can say stop, and we can say go, and we can slow it down. Well, we work to be able to slow it down, right? We work to be able to hold in stasis that which we must come to understand, Can I digress a moment about the nature of the word spontaneity? Spontaneous. That was for Kant this essential feature of consciousness as it relates to time. And what does spontaneous mean, at least to me, in this moment? Spontaneous means all at once, and which, there's words like now, and there's words like all at once. And in our crudeness, that usually means hurry up, or that usually means, go, and that usually means, jumping ahead. It's rajas of the three gunas. Rajas is acceleration, tamas is quietening, or decay, or many things, slowing down, descent. Rajas is ascent, tamas is descent, and of course sattvas is harmony, or the unity in them all. So there's always that. But as we come to learn of the all at once, we see, in relation to time, the freedom of consciousness. Consciousness is an independent energy, independent of time. Independent of time in the way we have come to know the laws of time. It seems it is spontaneous. It is apart from that, you see. It doesn't mean haphazard, and extempore, not so much as a style, but extempore means outside of time, as does ecstasy. But spontaneous, I think, is really good, because it has this notion for us, all at once existing as a whole. That's what I like about it. A wholeness that exists independently of time. Spontaneity, an essential feature of consciousness. They're all at once, which we come to understand its workings of when we are visited by it. But again and again, we, re-experience it in our minds, you might say, or reimagine it, or re-examine it, or allow it to enact itself in so many ways. One of the ways, of course, is language, and in thinking, freedom of thinking, so that we can learn these things, along the pathways as they present themselves to us spontaneously, you see. And anyway, but physical society can't do that. Physical society must work. The pieces and the things must work, mechanistically, and so humans Man's sheer existence cannot be endangered for the sake of his moral dignity, because its sheer existence must come for everything else to come after it. Uh, when a craftsman, and I admire this simple and profound metaphor of Schiller's, he writes, when a craftsman repairs a timepiece, he can still its wheels. But the living clockwork of the state has to be repaired while it continues to strike or to go. The turning wheel has to be replaced while still in motion. How do you preserve the motion while you're replacing the turning of the wheel? Support has to be found to secure the continuation of society, rendering it independent of the natural state that one seeks to transcend. The support cannot be found, and this is what he was taught, in the aftermath of the French Revolution, and perhaps taught by the harshness that he saw in the Duke who took him from his home to educate him so well. But also this same Duke, as many of them did, they were enlightened despots. They imprisoned people. They imprisoned those who threatened somehow, their sense of control, because they had the jurisdiction, authority to do so, the power to do so, let us say. The misuses of power in the state were something that Schiller always knew, but he would make reference to the French Revolution a lot, and that's become part of his story, in relation to the development of his thought. And so, anyway, so the support cannot be found from the natural character of human individuals to have any notion of reform, because the mechanism cannot be stopped. It can be sped up. It can be sped up, by crowds and masses and mass feeling. But let's get back to Schiller's actual writing here. I want to get to that. The support for the formation and repair, reform of the state cannot be found in the natural character of man, for this character is selfish and violent, more inclined to the destruction of society than its preservation. Nor can it be found in his moral character, for, as we have seen, this must first be cultivated, and the legislator, the lawmaker, could never act nor ever depend with any degree of certainty upon this character, because it is free and never made manifest. This inner quality of moral character is never made manifest in a way that the legislator can even perceive, much less react or respond to, because it's invisible. You cannot see it with your eyes, And because of that, we must culture ourselves to learn to see. We must learn to learn when we're talking about moral character. And society is in a different relation to that than the individual, the questing and searching individual. In the masterpieces of literature, such as ourselves, society isn't moving in that way. It's not aware of that domain. It's not that kind of being to have such an intelligence. It cannot. One must therefore, back to Schiller, part license from man's physical character and freedom from his moral character. In other words, one must give physical character what is due to it according to the nature of physical character. I'm paraphrasing it or interpreting it. And one must give physical character, physical need, necessity in nature its due, and freedom from freedom. That is the fruit, actually, the demand as well as the fruit, transformed, of moral character. And one must bring the first base human nature into conformity with law. And this is an aim of aesthetic education. One must make the moral imagination, one must bring it to sense impression. See, this is a demand, and let me set that aside then for now, and try to not extrapolate from this, but amplify this in our minds. The demand in education is to give to animal nature its due. Put the load of the donkey upon the donkey, and the load of the spirit is of a different nature. It does carry its load and it is strengthened, but the nature of the load is different. And if you confuse the loads, and put one upon the other, which we often do, well, this is difficult and this is troubling, but it can be remedied with true understanding. This is the way wisdom is to the health, of our minds, the strength of our minds when we come to understand it in this way. And this is wisdom literature that we can learn from, you see. So, human consciousness in its formation must be brought closer to nature, but in a certain way, not dominated by necessity, but, for example, in the creation of artworks, an artwork of pure abstraction. Well, that's cool. That's good, actually. In its way, it's certain demands and certain challenges to bring that to nature, because abstraction as art, in art, does have something that we can call a basic nature. And without that closeness, it does become like, abstract, like an edge, or a line without end, or absolute verticality. It remains a concept, and the concept can feed us in certain ways spontaneously in our intuition. But to make art, we've got to bring it into closer to nature so that it can be perceived in the form of the artwork, be it the poem or the sculpture or the painting or the picture. And so in that way, we bring the moral imagination closer to nature. Whereas nature, the natural person, the inflamed moral passions of the crowd person, the one who is inflamed by all the social excitements, who is more likely to be destructive to the state than helpful to the state or anything, must be brought closer to the realm of the spirit, you might say, so that it helps to temper the passions, of the unformed when they're brought closer to the meaning of what it is that is exciting us so, I must say, of course, because, let us, speak of ourselves in the ways that we are excited by things that we don't understand, and thus led through ignorance to formulate notions of our own character, for example, that have been fed by the wrong kinds of energies. And, the donkeys load for the donkey and the spirits load for the spirit. Well, we don't know that, and yet we're living in the realm of the donkey and the spirit all the time. And we have to come to learn that so we can take care of ourselves and to take care of the formation of our thoughts and to be able to attend to the way that they move. It is right. It is a human necessity. It is a necessity of moral freedom. It's the burden laid upon us, by consciousness and its desire to come to a true awareness of the things that matter, you see. And so there's this reciprocal movement. You bring nature to spirit and you bring spirit to nature, or nature must feed on spirit and spirit must feed on nature in a certain sense. This is what William Blake was getting at when he said, where man is not, nature is barren, because it is in consciousness that creativity as such is conceived. Conception is what it means. And so conception as a spontaneous existing energy becomes, activated as an idea, as activated as a form in the things of nature. Conception is birth, and this can happen on the aesthetic plane as well as, of course, it does happen on the natural plane. These are some of the dualities and the ways that they move in the consciousness of Schiller, or at least what it leads us to. And so let's look, because actually it too, as a meditation on language arts, it's also a consideration of the nature of poetry, and so for more explicit examples, continue from this point when we look at for example, these things I was talking about, spirit and nature, okay? Law and sense impression, right? Divinity and, visitation, divinity and manifestation, right? Epiphany, what does epiphany mean? Epiphany, does it mean emergence? Coming out of non-appearance into appearance, coming into epiphany. It means mind, out of mind, I think. Epiphany, I think phany is P-H-A-N-E, mind, epiphany. All of this involves, bringing together into a unity. It involves making the duality, seeing the duality as a unity, which only occurs in their own moment in time, right? Always one predominates, one quality predominates over the other. This is why we're able to move in space, because it's this dynamic kind of balance and imbalance that is always working. Um, this is the way it is. But anyway, so let's revisit the poem by William Blake from Auguries of Innocence. It's just 4 lines, and because it gives it to us right side by side in parallel, where William Blake, gives us this thought to see a world, to see a world in a grain of sand. The natural form that you can touch and feel is a grain of sand. Very real, the essence of grittiness. Oh, quite small, and also quite common. It is sand, but it's a grain of sand. It's an individual manifestation of sand. To see in a grain of sand a world. To see a world, what would be formless otherwise, to see a world in a grain of sand. And heaven in a flower. No, to see a world in a grain of sand and heaven in a wildflower. To hold infinity in the palm of your hand. One of these, only probably maybe like this. And eternity in an hour. To see a world in a grain of sand and heaven in a wildflower. Hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour. To bring it all into time, to bring it all into the form of the biological changing flower, to bring it all into the tiny commonness of the grain of sand, the conceptual reality and the nature. Nature needs spirit and spirit needs nature, and we see their sattvas, we see their harmony, in the works of art. Well, we see all their transitions, we see their rajas, we see their tamas, we see their sattvas, sometimes all at once, in a grain of sand or a wildflower or even the palm of your hand. So that's or example of what Schiller can give us as a way to interpret some of these poems. And so that's that one. Now, but here's another one. And William Blake talked about it, with Urizen. Oh, the weariness, right, of Urizen. Oh, the weariness, as we wander in the manacled world of law, the drudge and the toil, under the weight, of time and necessity. And yet, there is that we see from those shackles, and this could be the meaning of those things, and the meaning and the purpose and the value, of all that we cannot see beyond, And then this concept, this guiding light, this beacon, this shining star, can become a compulsion of its own and become a complex in and of itself. And what once was a simplicity re-knits itself into a complexity. And that, that urge or the obsession, for example, to make art, you might say, and yet it can be resolved in the movement of consciousness. And Schiller can help us to understand what is going on in this poem by Robinson Jeffers. This one is called, this poem by Robinson Jeffers is like, it is the bringing of nature itself closer to the the knotted horizon, the obsession with the tools of one's craft, the obsession, the challenges of one's craft, which one becomes devoted to. And devotion is a wholeness in and of itself, but devotion has its arduous stages, and sometimes, the frustration is you're right, it's the impossibility of seeing through the barriers to the true understanding of what it is that we seek or what we're after, and the stratagems, that we might have, or the obsessions, or the compulsions, and so in Robinson Jeffers' poem Love the Wild Swan, he writes, I hate my verses, every line, every word. Oh, pale and brittle pencils, ever to try one grass blade's curve, or the throat of one bird that clings to twig, ruffled against white sky. Oh, cracked in twilight mirrors, ever to catch one color, one glinting flash of the splendor of things. Unlucky hunter, oh, bullets of wax, the lion beauty, the wild swan wings, the storm of the wings. This wild swan of a world is no hunter's game. Better bullets than yours would miss the white breast. Better mirrors than yours would crack in the flame. Does it matter whether you hate yourself? At least love your eyes that can see, your mind that can hear the music, the thunder of the wings. Love the wild swan. And there's that word. There's that word, love. There's that word. Yeah, there's always that word. And yet, there it is. It's right there. The healing for the spirit caught, is in nature. Maybe, in our obsession, we're actually, no, because it's in the vein, we flee from the demands of nature and constriction, and every moment, every perception, is brings us an awareness of limitation and constriction, and it seems as if it's a stepping away from that infinity, which was, given to us in the all-at-once spontaneity, of the visitation, which we, it's our nature to reenact it in our minds, and in doing so, continue to learn from. But we have to learn how to understand and manage that reenactment, So we see the beauty of it at the brink of our own frustration with understanding it, and then the resolution is to love the wild swan, because the wild swan is the wild swan, and it is the way it is, and so it is the way it is. And, or is it? And so now, since, I want to also mention another poem too, because we could think of the William Blake poem, well, as the visitation, well, the seeing, of the way it really is in this form, where these worlds are brought into, conjunction and unity in this way. And then we see the kind of the characterological, the human drama, of Robinson Jeffers in the poem Love the Wild Swan. And what can this give us, though, this poem by Rilke? What can this give us as an inkling into the nature of the craftsman, of the craft, of the fulfillment of the worker in imagination, the fulfillment of the worker in imagination and form. The imagination being an imagination of vision, and the form being the expression and the embodying of that vision in the form of words, language, art, uniting thought to breath, the breath of the word, whether read or spoken. In Rilke's poem, written in appreciation and gratitude, you see, the worker is moved from the process of learning the nature of the work, and as a natural outcome of that, the worker offers some kind of gift or form of manifestation of what they have made to the spirit that has made it possible as a gift to return the gift in gratitude, you see. And this is an energy that is existing, in perhaps, cruder form, in the drive to propitiate, or to, and propitiate can mean anything, to mollify, to placate, to soothe by whatever means necessary. The savage beast, you might say, within, you know. And then there is, the gratitude in return for a gift given, which is like a different kind of a drama, a different drama of mastery with a different kind of outcome. But it's worth it to see this because, of course, art and religion, they educate each other. The same spontaneous essence of the human spirit, which makes aesthetic judgment, shares conceptions of deity. And so many conceptions of deity can be shared that we would be easily, educated rather than provoked or intimidated or seduced, by crude conceptions of divinity, which are also always there, but there are other conceptions of divinity which are more life-giving, and they're as common as sand. You can see them perhaps in a grain of sand, perhaps. Anyway, so Rilke wrote a poem in gratitude and homage to a great predecessor who inspired him in a particular way, to Holderlin. Rilke wrote a poem to Holderlin, and Holderlin's legend and Holderlin, the weight of Holderlin's myth, is so compelling, and for Rilke, it inspired him in a certain way. The story, the myth of Holderlin, the persona of Holderlin in our time, is, he became mad. He was driven mad. There was a period of great creativity, and then relationships seemed to fracture and alienation set in. The mechanism of necessity, being nature, went on, but the spirit was alienated from that. This is somewhat, and so the rest of the life of Holderlin was spent in a kind of confinement, and it was not the fate of Holderlin to be engaged with the world so blazingly creatively that he was before he went mad. So, but what a timeless creation, We can say he wrote before he went mad, but his creation, what he created, is the container for the harsh difficulty of his fate, It's the mystery of art and the way that it can help us in our consciousness with so many things that can, trouble us. Anyway, but it is the way. It is the way that inspiration is reenacted again and again so we can nourish our sense of it. Rilke writes this poem to Holderlin. I'll read it to you. I'm going to read in public. And remember, this is also something, to me anyway, to read it and to experience it. We can do this in a poem. A poem is the only thing that you can read and experience, in the way that it is meant to be experienced as a form in time and space, and as a palpable form in consciousness. Reading is essentially a cognitive act, in the way that sight, smell, taste, touch, and any of these things can never be. It makes us aware that our metaphor, seeing, it doesn't mean physical seeing. It's a metaphor for vision, you see, which is, not as scary or sensational as it sounds. It's common as sand. Every grain of sand. Anyway, to Holderlin, Rilke writes, we are not permitted to linger, even with what is most intimate. From images that are full, the spirit plunges on to others that suddenly must be filled. There are no lakes till eternity. Here, falling is best, to fall from the mastered emotion into the guessed at and onward. To you, O majestic poet, to you the compelling image, O caster of spells, was a life entire when you uttered it. A line snapped, shut like fate. There was a death even in the mildest, and you walked straight into it. But the God who proceeded you led you out and beyond it. O wandering spirit, most wandering of all, how snugly the others live in their heated poems and stay content in their narrow similes, taking part. Only you move like the moon, and underneath brightens and darkens the nocturnal landscape, the holy, the terrified landscape, which you feel in departures. No one gave it away more sublimely, gave it back more fully to the universe without any need to hold on. Thus, for years that you no longer counted, wholly you played with infinite joy, as though it were not inside you but lay, belonging to no one, all around on the gentle lawns of the earth, where the godlike children had left it. Ah, what the greatest have longed for, you built it, free of desire, stone upon stone, until it stood. And when it collapsed, even then you weren't bewildered. Why, after such an eternal life, do we still mistrust the earthly, instead of patiently learning from transience the emotions for what future slopes of the heart in pure space? And, the poem brings us there, does it not? And how is it that Schiller has contributed to our understanding of this? Well, it's all a great convocation. It's a great contemporariety, and the blending of the energies is there. The blending of the energies is there, moving in all of us all the time in utterly different ways. It's happening all the time, all at once, and but the understanding of it, is a rigorous study, and requiring a great deal of attention and everything related to that. The most human faculty, right now, as the analogic consciousness seeks to survive and to flourish in the conditions available to it in the digital age, is one way that it can be studied further is in the notion of this. There's this basic human energy called attention, attentiveness, and what we tend to natural observation, And it was natural observation that for Goethe became the fruit of his study of the unity that he found in nature and in himself. And it was this motion of language in, give and take and polarity and equanimous rhetorical poetic forms, so that Schiller provides us with a way to perceive the movement of thought, and it was between the two, it was a part of what both of them gave to us. So I want to convey to you, and just one more quotation, and again, am I going to find it from Goethe? And it was a letter that Goethe wrote to Schiller after reading his aesthetic letters, and it actually originally I was going to convey this letter to you, and then I was going to read a letter that Schiller wrote to Goethe. But believe it or not, I left my journal in which I'd written this. I left it at home. So I thought, oh, that's great. I'm glad I didn't think of that before I saw that I had done that. But in that notebook was where I had written down, Schiller's letter. But I can say to you, and maybe I should mention the conversation between Schiller and Goethe when they were returning home, or returning to where they were staying, I guess, from attending a lecture in Weimar, a lecture on some kind of scientific lecture, and which to Goethe and Schiller both was like, is this a way to feed our imaginations as we learn how to observe natural things? Well, they must have been discussing something along these lines as they were coming home. When Schiller shared that to him the lecture was nothing in his mind, but a kind of a mass of disconnected ideas, and this was, this was what he was, perceiving, what he was attending to in his mind, as he reenacted whatever inspiration might be there, and Goethe, at some point in their conversation, Goethe began to speak of the archetypal plant, the plant that embodied the structural essence of all plants, and began to sketch it spontaneously, perhaps, and he began to sketch it, and Schiller, said, but you are sketching something that doesn't exist. And Goethe said, oh, this means that I see my ideas with my eyes, Oh, and so this became kind of a crystallizing moment. You might say maybe it is for us as we come to understand, the nature of their mutual creative contribution to us. Of the two forms that we can perceive truth, that truth can come to us, that we can perceive the unity in nature, which Goethe was doing when he drew the structure of the archetypal plant that he could see with his eyes. Whereas for Schiller, it was the duality became his workshop and the ground of his work, when through his notions of character and the nature of character and history, he began to work out, the interplay of these yins and yangs, because it's that kind of philosophy, and these are this is so valuable to us, to understand what really happened, and Goethe was deeply satisfied, to read Schiller's aesthetic lectures. And Goethe wrote Schiller this letter. He writes, "The manuscript sent to me I read at once with great pleasure. I drained it in a single draught, just as a precious drink that suits our nature slips down willingly and shows its health-bringing effect already upon the tongue, putting our nervous system into a good mood. These letters were pleasing and beneficial to me. How could it be otherwise, when I found described so consistently and so nobly what I have come to recognize for a long time as right, to what I have in part lived and in part wished to live and wished to live." And so from there we can sense that, Goethe experienced the letters, his reading of it was a spontaneous thing in his spirit, kind of an all-at-onceness in the perception of the meaning of it, or of the health-giving nature of it, that he, received in the proportionate manner and way, and could feel it, give its health-giving benefit, to the rest of the human and imaginative form as he conceived it at that time, in his work on perceiving the unity in nature. And so, what Schiller wrote to Goethe, actually, I can tell you this, even though I left it at home in my notebook where I had written it down. It was in the form, actually, more of like an appreciation of the character of the one such as Goethe, who would undertake such a work as of tracing the lines consistently that one sees as manifested in nature, both inner and outer, and following this line in such a creative way in every particle, and discovering out of an inner necessity to discover the relation of that particle to the whole as a holistic and total vision of nature. And Schiller's appreciation in that way was kind of like put into the form of an appreciation of his appreciation of what he saw as Goethe's path, like as if to say, I acknowledge the path that you have walked on, and I see the value of it in this way. That's kind of like paraphrasing the meaning of it as I can recollect. And so this too, it gives us fruitful fruitful contemplations. And so with that in mind, there is maybe one more little thing I can say, and I believe that at this point, I will begin to try and see how it can all kind of like be brought to a place where we can put a bow on it, and present it, in the proper veilings, and so it's going to be from later on in Schiller's book, yeah, and I think it's fair to say that there's that in the letters which makes them, in a certain sense, very intuitive and very creative and inspired commentaries on his time and ways of understanding what it is about society and in human character and the forces and energies out of human character that manifest themselves as what is creative and destructive in society. As Scripture tells us, the hands that build up can also tear down. And Schiller is providing us or gifting us with a kind of an articulation of how that can be. But now, it's also true, though, that Schiller speaks of beauty, as a concept, in a way that it is important to understand, in a way that is a little bit more in its own domain, rather than having kind of an immediate kind of like relation to a subject such as the state, or the breakdown or whatever, or the building up of the state and all of this. It still is like a work of philosophical anthropology. And so in terms of just the human form or the human mind, and where this thing that is beauty, it exists, it comes to be known to the human mind in its manifestations and in its expressions in the world of time and space. But there's a further description of that, or a further, description of the way that moves, okay? Because I guess I want to emphasize that. That's what it is in Schiller's thoughts. So we'll just read one more paragraph of Schiller's. We have seen, this is from the 16th letter, we have seen how the beautiful emerges from the reciprocity of two contrary impulses and from the connection of two contrary principles, and whose supreme ideal is thus to be found in the most perfected bond and equilibrium of reality and form. This equilibrium can, however, remain only an idea that reality can never quite achieve. In reality, one element will always outweigh the other, and the most that we can expect from experience is a fluctuation between both principles in which now reality and now form is preponderant. Beauty as an idea is therefore eternally an indivisible unity, because there can be only one single equilibrium. By contrast, beauty in experience will always be dual, right? Beauty as an idea is a unity, contemplated that way as one. Beauty in experience, though, will always be dual, because fluctuation can disturb the equilibrium now to one side and then to the other. So that's an evocation of the dynamic balance. And now, this is what I must do. There is the fact that, Beethoven's Ode to Joy is adapted, the lyrics are from a poem by Schiller. And, Ode to Joy, which we are so familiar with, joyful, joyful, we adore thee, God of glory, Lord of love, hearts unfold like flowers before thee, opening to the sun above. Quell the pain of sin and sadness, drive the dark of night away. Giver of immortal gladness, lead us to the light of day. Okay, but now there's many translations, many paraphrases of that poem, Ode to Joy, by Schiller. It's a summation of a kind of a universal message that he has. Actually, this is a flowering. And I wonder, actually, if we've been looking at some of the foliage of Schiller's, creative gift. But this is the flowering of it, this poem, Ode to Joy. And this is a very fine translation or paraphrase or re-gifting of that poem to us. It is made by Tracy K. Smith. Tracy K. Smith was America's Poet Laureate, as I understand, from 2017 to 2019. Very well known. And this poem then is Tracy K. Smith. I also want to mention that the translation of Rilke's poem to Holderlin was translated by Stephen Mitchell. And so this is why I wanted to honor translation, transforming one poem into another through the medium of language, so that no matter what we lose in the original, like, sensuous, immediate nature of the poem, it is somehow we come to become more aware of poetry as a cognitive art in our consciousness. This is the mystery of translation in the way that it is and isn't, the original. It is and it isn't. It's a furthering, it's a reenactment of an original spontaneity. And this is Tracy K. Smith's creative interpretation of Schiller's Ode to Joy. You'll easily sense, that dun 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 dun. But who knows? The momentums might change as the ideas kind of emerge from it, as they will. Anyway, Ode to Joy, as translated by Tracy K. Smith. Ode to Joy, as written by, as composed by, as created by Schiller. O friend, my heart has tired of such darkness. Now it vies for joy. Joy, bright God spark, born of ever, daughter of fresh paradise. Where you walked once, now walk rancor, greed, suspicion, anger, fright. Joy, the breeze, off all that's holy, pure with terror, wild as flame. Make us brothers, give us comfort, bid us past such fear and hate. If you've loved another's beauty, if you've craved the warmth of flesh, if your spirit is invested in another's sense of worth, lift your voice to touch my voice now. Let our song bring joy to earth. Lift your voice to touch my voice now. Let our song bring joy to earth. Joy like milk, milk of mothers, kind and wicked, all deserve. Joy's compassion, freely given. Joy which can't be sold or earned, in the depths of the blackest soil, in the lightless atmosphere, in the atom and the ether, animating all that is. Let us feel it, let us heed it, let us seek its deepest kiss. Let us live our brief lives mining that which joy alone can give. Battered planet, home of billions, our long shadow stalks your face. All we've fractured, all we've stolen, all we've sought, blind to your grace. Earth, forgive us, claim us, let us live in humble thanks and joy. Let our hearts wake from our stupor, let us praise you in one voice. Lift our voices. And it seems to be the theme song of the European Union, I guess. And that's a part of the evolution. No, that's the part of the fate of the work of art in time. And you see, this is what we learn from the classics, but we can learn it from a grain of sand. Every form has a fate, in our consciousness. And we can learn from that about what we can learn from that. And this, is an example of that, so aptly made available to us by Schiller and by Goethe and by all the great classics and the great masterpieces of literature. They are examples of the language arts in which we are all involved as we go about, the work of learning and understanding and creating, because it is our nature. Eternity is in love with the productions of time, as William Blake said. And that is simply true. So, on that note then, I thank you for your heroic listening, as always, and say to you, the works are there for our benefit, and so long for now.